So China, after the already bring down the great efforts in curbing the virus spreading, China has been like aiding many African nations with clinical experience, with the PPEs, medical supplies, and especially the data monitoring and how to help them to flatten the curve. So that has to be already being very effective.
There's so much talk about vaccine. There's been reporting here in the West that China is leading the global race in the development of a COVID-19 vaccine. Half of the vaccines in clinical trials discovered by Chinese companies. What do you make of that?
Yeah, the vaccine is just one of the many in development. There are currently as far as like 10 human trials around the world, and 4 are in U.S. and 5 in China. So China has slightly more than the U.S. so far, but 1 in U.K. But more than 100 vaccines are still in pre-clinical trials. So basically, most of the vaccines are in pre-clinical trial, and very few are in the human trial. But for the human trial, those are the first step, just trying to look at the safety standard. So the China's one vaccine on trial already passed the first stage of the safety trial, and they give people different dose and high dose, low dose, and they find a small side effect, which is promising, means that it's safe to implement the second stage to try to look at whether they are effective in addressing or to developing immune system to fight against the virus. So that will be the next step.
How long do you think before we'll see a vaccine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it will be several steps, and I think before the mass production, it may come out for the essential workers to avoid them to be transmitting virus to others. So this may be in a small scale, but for the general public to be able to protected by any vaccine, the estimate is at the end of this year or early next year. And it could be even further, as we know, SARS outbreak. After that, the funding was halted, and none of the vaccines was finally developed to the mass production stage.
How would you say China is matching up on the world stage when it comes to scientific investment moving into this area?
Yeah, that's super important. I think China has been catching up in multiple metrics. So, for example, the number of scientific publications outnumber many other countries, including the U.S., and the number of patents. And also, China also in the healthcare sector, they have almost the same number of physicians per capita or population. But in terms of quality, China still have room to improve. For example, the number of citations for those scientific publications, which is the quality of the scientific publication, is still lower than many developed countries, and also the patents. The quality of patent is still room to improve. And also we know that the U.S. has been developing the biomedicine industry for many decades, and they have the system called the NIH, the National Institute of Health, which is funding all kinds of innovative research on the scientific part of the medicine. But China has NSF. It's very similar to the U.S. National Science Foundation, but there's no specific funding agency to fund or to stimulate innovations in the biomedicine sector. So that's why we see still 60% of the new drugs every year come out of the U.S. market. So there's a large gap in developing such a funding agency to promote innovative research.